In this video, we'll explore how to use the Webhook block in Landbot. Webhooks allow different web applications to communicate by sharing real-time data and updates. Essentially, they enable one application to send automated information or alerts to another whenever a specific event occurs. Here's how we'll structure this video. First, we'll explain what webhooks are and how they're used. Next, we'll dive into Landbot and demonstrate how to set up the webhook block. And finally, we'll look at some real-world examples built with Landbot. If you already have some background knowledge on webhooks, feel free to skip ahead to the section on setting up the webhook block in Landbot. So, what exactly are webhooks? Imagine you have a doorbell at your house. When someone presses the doorbell button, it sends a signal that rings a bell inside, alerting you that someone is at the door. You don't have to keep peeking out of the window to see if someone's there. The doorbell lets you know automatically. Webhooks are like that doorbell. They help one computer program let another one know that something has happened without needing to be checked constantly. So this is how a webhook works. An event occurs in the first application, like a new sale being made, a file being uploaded, or a form being submitted. The webhook then sends a message, usually in the form of an HTTP request, to a URL configured to receive webhooks from the first application. Then the data is processed in the second application and acts on it, like creating a new entry, sending a notification, or updating a database. Webhooks are efficient because they avoid the need for repeatedly asking for new information. Instead, data is pushed automatically when it's available, saving time and resources. Setting up a webhook may seem technical, but it's definitely accessible. Tools like Zapier or make it easier for non-technical users to set up useful webhooks without writing any code. These platforms often provide guided steps, but for those who want more customization though, a basic understanding of web development can be helpful. With that said, let's jump into Landbot and set up the webhook block. Landbot's webhook block acts as an API REST block. This means it allows you to connect to external APIs by sending HTTP requests and receiving responses. Inside this block, you'll notice a few key sections. The first one is URL and method. Here, you define the HTTP method, such as post, get, put, etc. For example, the post method is commonly used to send data for creating a resource, while get retrieves information from a server. You'll also set up the endpoint URL, which is the address where the webhook sends data to or receives when the event occurs. Note that the URL must use HTTPS to ensure secure data transmission. Next, you can configure domain fields. This feature is useful if you plan to set up multiple webhook blocks with the same URL. By creating a domain field, you can easily reuse it across webhooks. It's also handy for switching between test and production environments, as updating the domain field will update all related webhooks without needing to change each one manually. In the next section, Send Params, you can add parameters and their fields to the URL. These parameters, which appear in green, will be appended to the URL. You can also add it directly, but if you're including many fields, we recommend using Send Params for organization. Next is Customize Headers. Headers are key value pairs that provide additional information about the request. Think of sending a letter through the mail. The letter has information inside, like the event that just happened, but the envelope has important details on it. The address, the return address, and maybe even a stamp to prove it's genuine. They are part of the metadata and help the server understand the context, structure, and purpose of the request. Knowing which headers to add to an HTTP request depends on what you're trying to do and the requirements of the service you're working with. Every service or API you're using will have instructions on which headers are necessary. These instructions are usually provided in the service's API documentation. The most common headers you'll often need are content type, which tells the receiving service what format the data is in, authorization, if the server requires you to prove your identity, which is very common. It often includes a token or a key, and user agent. This isn't always necessary, but it can be helpful for tracking who and what is sending the request. Now, moving into the next section, we have the customized body. The body section in a webhook is where the actual data about the event is sent. It's the main content of the message, much like the information written in a letter. JSON is the most widely used format because it's easy for both humans and computers to read and write. You might be asking, why would I want to use the customized body section if I can add parameters in the end of the request URL, like we saw earlier? Both are valid ways to send data in a webhook, but each has its own use case and advantages. The customized body section is ideal for sending large, structured, or sensitive data, mainly because you have a lot of different information to send, like a complete user profile or an order with multiple items. The body can handle complex nested structures that are easier to read and manage in formats like JSON. Also, the body of the request can be encrypted more easily and securely using HTTPS, which helps protect sensitive data. If you were to put sensitive information directly in the URL, it could be logged or cached in various places, for example, server logs, browser history, etc., making it more vulnerable to exposure. And lastly, URLs have a length limit, generally around 2,000 characters, so they are not suitable for transmitting large amounts of data. Here is an example of a body formatted correctly in JSON. Keep in mind that fields must be wrapped in quotes. The next section, Test Your Request, allows you to test the webhook functionality. You can set test values for fields and check the response status and body. Testing is critical because webhooks may not work perfectly on the first attempt. Here are some common status codes. 200. The request was successful, and the server returned the expected data. 400. The server could not understand the request due to invalid syntax, for example, missing required parameters. And also 404, not found. This happens when the request resource could not be found on the server. The response body is where the server sends back additional information about the result of the request. For error responses, it might include an error message. The next section is Save Responses as Fields. You might want to save the response of a request as a field every time it's triggered. For example, to store a record, like getting users' data from a third-party API and saving it in your own database, or to check a user's record in a CRM and see if he's an existing customer, in order to split the bot flow. Now, if you want to save a specific part of the response in a specific field, you need to test your request in the previous step and select the value you want to save from the dropdown. You can break down the response into however many fields as you want. Lastly, response routing lets you set the block outputs. The webhook block already has green and red outputs. Green for successful calls and red for failed calls, for example, if the server is unreachable. But you can also split the flow based on the response status code, configuring paths in the response routing section and then continuing to set up the flow on the canvas. Great, now that we've covered the webhook block setup in Landbot, let's move on to some real-world examples. I'll also include links below in the video description so that you can download templates for each example directly into your Landbot account. We'll go through 3 examples. Starting with the first example, I want to show you how OpenAI can be integrated on a chatbot flow. Imagine you're a business that ships goods to clients and wants to gather feedback on the delivery experience. To make it easy, there's a QR code on each package that directs customers to a customer satisfaction chatbot. Here's how it works. If a customer leaves negative feedback, our integration with OpenAI with webhooks will gather all the necessary information and ask it to make a summary of it. The summary is then automatically sent to a database where it's ready for a human agent to review and take action. This use case is powerful because it enables businesses to respond quickly to negative feedback. If you're interested in a more in-depth review of this example, I'll leave a couple of links below. One takes you to an on-demand webinar where we showcase more in-depth how to build this chatbot on WhatsApp, and the other link to a step-by-step blog article. Now, for the second example, we will verify if a user exists in a custom database before continuing a chatbot flow. When a user provides their email address, which serves as their unique identifier, we send it to Jano, a no-code database, via Webhooks to see if the email exists. If it does, the Webhook returns user data like name, company, phone as fields, enabling a personalized flow. If the email isn't found, the bot initiates a lead generation process, dynamically adapting the flow based on whether the user is new or already registered. Here is a breakdown. We ask the email and save it under the variable @email. We then send this field in the URL to Jano. In Jano, we set up a function that returns all the information from the user with that email. We then save in fields all the information that we need like name, company name, phone, etc., but also the field contact ID, which is used then to split the flow between new and existing users. With the condition block, we basically check if it's set or not. If it is, it means that the user exists and goes through the green path. If it doesn't exist, it goes through the red path. Although this example uses Jano, this approach is compatible with any CRM that has API capabilities. And for the third and final example, imagine you have a chatbot where users select what type of doctor they need, whether a cardiologist, a pediatrician, etc. And we use this input to filter and display relevant doctors from a database. Having a closer look, what we did was, with a buttons block, we displayed the different options. We saved the response under a field and sent it to Jano via Webhook. See how the field is added in the URL. In Jano, what we did was set up a query response with a function that looks for the profession inside the database and returns all doctors from that specific profession. Back in Landbot, we stored this response under an array field, as it contains a lot of different fields. And with the dynamic data block, we display all the values from the response array field. This example features doctors, but it can obviously be anything else. And that's pretty much it. Remember, you will find templates for each of the examples shown in this video down in the video description. Feel free to download them for free into your Landbot account. Remember, you'll need accounts for any third-party services like OpenAI or Jano, and you'll need to replace the credentials in the bot with your own. If you'd like a deeper dive into any of these examples or need guidance with a different use case, feel free to reach out. We're here to help. So, to wrap up, we started by covering what webhooks are and how they work. Then, we set up the webhook block in Landbot, and finally, we explored some real-world applications. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.